Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, bringing you episode 188 here at the Tavern, presented by HeroTaku.com. Now, in my last video, I went ahead and broke down how Gokai changes outside of the ending of the Gokaiger series are just plain ridiculous because they are essentially trying to force them to do Gokai changes when logically they should not be able to do that given the nature of the series, the nature of the Ranger keys, and so forth. If you want more detailed analysis on that, go watch 187 to hear my thoughts on that. And of course, I keep getting the comments that I'm overthinking it, I'm nitpicking it too much, and fair enough, but I'd like to think that these are the kind of things that the creators should be thinking of in the series, that's not left to us fans to figure out after the fact. But one comment did kind of stick out to me, and this was a comment posted by user Nightwing45304. And I'm just going to kind of condense what he said here. You can go back to that video and actually look at his comments entirety. But, of course, he also said I was overthinking it. But he addresses when I talk about how the previous Ranger teams are actually giving their keys to Guy in order for them to do the Gokai changes within the series. And he says, and I quote, as for why the teams may give back their powers over instead of showing up, or showing, they have lives outside of being Sentai, and letting the Gokaiger borrow their powers can give them a break, unquote. Now that's an interesting way of thinking about it, and because he posted that comment, I felt I had to go ahead and kind of respond to it, not to attack him or break down, exactly what he said, but because it does actually bring up an interesting question about what happens at the end of the series after they're no longer Rangers, and kind of what the status is of being Power Rangers, or in this case, Super Sentai. But let me address the comment directly first, and I'll get into kind of what it actually leads me into today's topic. Because the thing that again bothered me, and I brought this up in the previous video, was that there's a crisis, there's something going on. So bad that the Gokaiger feel that they need to borrow Ranger keys, and then the other Ranger teams willingly give them up as opposed to participating in the battle. Now, of course, Nightwing is saying right here that they have lives outside of being Sentai, and thus they can't be everywhere at any time, possibly, or they don't have time to bother with what's going on. Now, of course, the stakes in this particular situation, that I brought up in the video, which is why they were in the 2000th episode, was to find buried treasure, basically. And of course, you could argue that, well, it's just buried treasure, yeah, let them borrow as long as you promise to bring it back, young man, would kind of be the way to approach it in that. But if I may put it in this context, imagine in this case that the Power Rangers are police officers. Okay, let's just say for the sake of our argument. And I don't mean like SPD or Deca Ranger or anything like that. Put it in the context that they are officers and there's a crisis or something going on that needs attention. And you're a veteran cop on the force. You've had many years. Maybe you're close to retirement. Maybe you have retired, whatever and stuff. But something's going on, and this young guy comes to you and say, "Hey, there's a crisis going on. I need your gun. I don't need you to come and help it. I just need your gun because we need extra help. And I'll promise I'll bring it back when I'm done." That would seem kind of odd. Wouldn't you say, you need bodies in a particular situation, and this guy comes up and says, well, we don't need you, we just need your gun. We don't need the actual person, we just need the hardware, we need the symbol, as it were, as opposed to actually you. And I just kind of find that, I don't know, that's kind of the way I equate it to, because, guys basically saying we need the weapon, we don't need you, which is disrespectful for the previous Sentai, of course, again, put into that context. Now, without dwelling too much on his comment, I get where he's coming from, and I get what he's trying to go ahead and say, But what I'm equating it to here, and what brings me to today's topic, is the idea of basically Ranger retirement. So I'm going to go ahead and address that here simply because I think it's an interesting topic to have about, where Rangers kind of view themselves in their whole lives. Now let's get one thing straight. You know, Zach is not sitting there his whole life saying, I am the Black Ranger, I am the Black Ranger, I am the Black Ranger. It's not the same thing as, say, Batman. There was a great Batman Beyond episode where, we think Bruce is going crazy because the voices in his head is telling him to jump out of a window. And of course, the voice says, Bruce, jump, whatever. But of course, Bruce counters like, that's not my mind talking to me because I don't call myself Bruce. He doesn't view himself as Bruce Wayne. He views himself as Batman because, as they say, Bruce Wayne's the secret identity or the mask, and Batman is the actual, person, is the soul. I don't think that there is a single Ranger in Power Rangers that looks at him or herself that particular way. Maybe Tommy, I don't particularly know, but at least in Down Thunder, he seemed to be over being a ranger somewhat. So I don't think that what the Rangers have is any particular obsession with being a Ranger, or they really equate it to self-identity, I guess would be the best way to go ahead and put that. But I do think that the Rangers in Power Rangers, and again, we're limited to Power Rangers because I haven't seen all of Sentai, and I'm a bigger expert in Power Rangers than Sentai. But I think all the Power Rangers do share this sense of duty and responsibility, to where if there was a similar situation in Power Rangers where, let's say, the exact same circumstances happen and, Orion is coming to get their Ranger keys, for a particular mission, whatever, I don't see any of those Rangers really giving up their powers to this guy to go do whatever, that they feel that they have to participate in whatever battle, whatever quest, whatever is going on, out of a sense of duty as being a Power Ranger. Let's again equate that to being a police officer here, because, and this is actually where it kind of breaks down a little bit, because here's the odd thing about it. If you're a police officer in this situation, or an Army soldier, or Navy officer, or whatever like that, I think, 99% of those guys can go ahead and step down once their time to retire, when their mission is over, or whatever the case may be. Because you're part of a greater organization where it's next man up. Your time is over, next man up. Much in the same way as in sports. You're there, you're 4 years in college, you're done, next man up gets his turn to prove himself. That's kind of how it is. So I don't think that, and I'm not trying to speak for him, but in my estimation, I don't think there are too many police officers out there that feel that retiring is maybe a sense of betrayal to the community and the people they serve, because they did their bid for king and country, but now here it is, they got somebody else to replace them. In the terms of being a Power Ranger, though, there really isn't someone to replace you a lot of the time. Yes, I mean, we get Rangers who swap out, but in some cases it's next man up. She died, now Caron's got to be the pink Galaxy Ranger. That's the situation there. But I don't see the Rangers often walking away from being a Power Ranger unless it's something that's forced on them. One of the unusual things about both Sentai and Power Rangers is that the mission they're on is only for a year, and then a lot of them have to kind of give it up. Because that's kind of where we are in the way the shows are, is that the events happen for 1 year. There's one event that's spanning months or however long it is, that they have to go ahead and deal with. Let's take a look at Time Force as a good example there. Now, the whole purpose of the Time Force series, you have to boil it down to, I mean, it's not about the Time Force Rangers specifically. Power Rangers Time Force is Rancid goes back in time, and these are the events that happen from the time he arrives back in 2001 to the time that he is apprehended. There's backstory to that and past history, and there's stuff that happens after that, of course, but what we focus on in the series is what happens within that frame of time. So when the series is over, we think, oh, they're not Rangers anymore because this particular event is over. Well, as one of my fellow reviewers once said, it's not the end, it's just another day in the life. And that's true of the Time Force Rangers. Look at them at the end of the series. They all still have their powers and they all still have their morphers. The battle against Rancic may be over, but there's other evil out there. There's other battles to fight. There's other things to go ahead and do. So, what I'd like to actually go ahead and do at this point is I want to run through every Ranger team from Mighty Morphin all the way up to Dino Charge. Not really counting Dino Charge since we actually haven't gotten to the end of the series, unless you live in Europe, of course. And I want to talk about how each team retired and how they are different from each other because it's actually unique when I think about it. Because, and again, here's the thing: if you lose your powers, that's one thing. You can't come back. There's nothing you can go ahead and do at that point. You can serve the community in other ways, obviously, but when you lose your powers, you're no longer a Power Ranger. But there are so many Ranger teams that have their powers at the end of the season, and just because that particular threat is done and over with, doesn't mean you stop being a Ranger, right? Okay, so let's take a look at this. So we look at the entirety of Mighty Morphin. Let's look at so Mighty Morphin all the way up to midway through Turbo is pretty much the same thing as far as passing on powers. Now the Rangers do retire because of, well, honestly, I do think they're kind of petty reasons in some cases because, here's the thing with the Mighty Morphin Rangers is that they are leaving in the middle of a war. Yes, they're able to get replacements, but again, this is not like the army, this is not like the police force where there's like an entire army of people to support you in this. In the case of Jason, Trini, and Zach, there were only 6 Rangers out there that we know of. Not discounting, Alien Rangers, Ancient Rangers, Samurai Rangers, and so forth. There's only 6 of them. And I always felt that for them to leave for a peace conference, I guess there's no easy way to say it. It is kind of selfish because it's what they want to do, and they do think it's going to go ahead and help. But I ask you, what exactly can 3 teenagers from America do at an international peace conference? The parameters of that were never fully defined, of course, but I always kind of imagine it was like some sort of model UN, because if this was like a peace conference, first of all, it doesn't go on for years and years and years. This would be something that maybe takes up months at the most, maybe a full year, I don't know, and peace over what? Peace in the Middle East? Are you actually trying to get something done? But for them to basically say, okay, I'm not going to fight evil anymore and protect the world. I'm going to go sit in this committee somewhere in Switzerland and try to do politicking and stuff. Because honestly, it sounds like that's something for a trained diplomat. And even if it's not an actual peace conference where they're actually making world policy, I mean, Jason does say in Zia that they did a lot of good, but that good is never specified, of course. If it is some sort of model UN teenagers from across the world getting together and singing Kumbaya, then for Jason, Zach, and Train to leave like that, that's incredibly selfish of them to give up being Power Rangers. Now, it is their choice, but I don't condone the choice. I think it's a poor choice given where you are, because look at where they left in the series. They got a brand new villain, Lord Zed, that came in. His monster was so powerful, they had to get new Zords. They created evil Rangers, which, if it wasn't for unique circumstances, they would have had to fight evil Power Rangers, and who knows how that would have turned out. And the battle has escalated so much to the point that a new Ranger had to be created because Tommy had lost his powers previously. So things at that point were particularly desperate. And you're telling me only a few short weeks after the introduction of your newest ally, you're going to call it quits? When the battle still rages and the greatest threat that you've faced up to that point is still out there causing mayhem and destruction, and then you're going to leave it in the hands of 3 unproven rookies, that you barely know? I mean, again, I just can't help but look at that decision as selfish on those Rangers' parts. And then when you fast forward, go ahead and take a look at, Kimberly and Aisha. We talked about this in Tanya's video, how Aisha stayed because she thinks she can actually do something because she was a veterinary assistant, so she can help cure an animal plague in Africa 10 years previously or something. But again, go watch that video. And then Kimberly wants to go out and do the Junior Olympics or something. It's not even the real Olympics, it's the Pan Global Games, which I guess are like the Paralympics or something like that, but it's obviously not the Olympics. It's not, I'm getting the gold medal for my country and all that. It's obviously something else. And yes, I know the Zoran says he doesn't want to deprive them of, personal lives and goals. He doesn't want them fully dedicated to the mission like that. Which begs the question, why did you get teenagers if this was something that was actually going to be, you actually thought about? You know what I'm saying? Because, again, we have 5 Rangers that left the team for over pretty selfish reasons. Now look at Tommy. Why did he leave the team? He lost his powers as the Green Ranger. He couldn't continue as a Ranger. Now, sure, he could have stayed around helping the team. That would have been something, but there was no talk of making another Ranger or him being the command center because, honestly, besides fighting, what does Tommy at this point in the series actually offer to anybody? So for Tommy to leave because he lost his powers, I get that. He comes back because he has his powers. But again, our 5 aforementioned Rangers leaving because of that, yeah, I just don't particularly get that. And then when we get to Turbo, so of course, Justin in Turbo film is obviously meant to be a stopgap measure. That here we are, Rocky's got a broken back or whatever and stuff. He can't be the Blue Ranger, so we gotta send this guy in. Except when Turbo comes around, the first couple of episodes, Rocky is obviously much, much better. Yet he doesn't continue to beat the Blue Ranger. And Rocky just kind of wanders off the set, as it were. I mean, because I don't know. I don't know why Steve Cardenas left exactly, but in story, I don't even think they explain why Rocky really left the series. He just kind of gave up, no real particular reason. Maybe he's going to college or something, but yeah, it's one of those things where, should I come back and risk hurting myself again to be a ranger or leave in the hands of a 12-year-old? Then again, they had Divatox as a villain, so it wasn't that bad. But of course, Divatox presented such a threat that they had to create new powers and new Zords. So there we are. And of course, what happens when Demetrius shows up and all that? Yep, Tommy, Kat, Tanya, and Adam give up their powers to pass it on because now we've kind of become like our own little private academy stuff. It's like, okay, you guys been Rangers long enough. Time to pass it on to another team. Which again, I don't get why they're particularly giving up because again, it seems that in the instance of Mighty Morphin to Turbo, they give up their powers for selfish reasons to go live their lives, which I get that, but when you're talking about, again, if this was an army and they were like generals and leaders, okay, I concede that. Yes, you need experienced command officers and whatnot, but you got like an army of thousands to protect against whatever the opposing force is. When there's only 5 or 6 of you at a given time, you can't just leave like that. I'm sure it's, very tempting to stay and help sick animals in the middle of Africa, but you gotta restore time to its proper date and fight this upcoming Machine Empire, which of course I don't think she knew. Yeah, she didn't know at that time the Machine Empire was there, but still you got Rita and Zed out there. You just can't send this little poor African girl to be a Power Ranger. You just can't. So, in summation, Mighty Morphin and Turbo, simply put, just kind of selfish for them to give up their powers and leave like that. Now, when we actually get into Power Rangers in Space, now, they did not lose their powers, they just demorphed. I'm sure the implication was they lost their powers, but since the series continued into Lost Galaxy, they did not. And what's interesting about that is that the Rangers have defeated Astronema, they defeated Dark Spectre, the universe is safe, And yet they're still Power Rangers. When they show up in Power to the 10th, they still have their morphers. They still have, well, I mean, their morphers are in a vault, but it seems like they're actually doing something or something's being done. Maybe the other four Rangers are doing something back on Earth, but Andros is still active. He has his morpher, he has the Mega Ship, he has the Megazord, all that stuff. Well, the Mega Ship, okay, it's coming back to me now. The Megaship was a museum. So now that does bring in the question of what was going on. But then Andros does say at the end of oh, the one where Kendricks is killed. Oh, I'm trying. Power of Pink. He says at the end of the Power of Pink, they have a mission to fulfill, and they're morphed, and they're still doing stuff. So whatever the hiccup was with the Space Rangers, they're out there still doing stuff. Yeah, that battle against Dark Spectre and their mission to save Zordon may be over. But what they obviously realize is that there's still evil out there. There's still stuff to go ahead and do. There's still, good they can do as Rangers. Galaxy Rangers. Now, of course, their mission ended, but the reason they gave up their powers was they need to restore the citizens of Marinoi from being stoned, so they put the sabers back in the stone. Now, they can resume those powers at any time, and I would assume that whenever the call is needed on Marinoi, since it's a brand new colony out in the middle of space, in the middle of nowhere, that they can become Galaxy Rangers at any time. And when there are unique circumstances, such as, Trakina going to Earth, or the Forever Red Bow with Vengix, yeah, then definitely, need to call their powers. So this is another example of a Ranger team who did not lose their powers or can regain their powers easily. They're still on mission, they're still protecting, they're still out there doing stuff. And they only had to give up their powers because they had to, not because they wanted to. Okay? Alright. Lightspeed Rescue. What's interesting here is that we actually see in the series, when they're not fighting demons, they're actually doing rescue work. Actually, the beginning of Trakina's Revenge, they're in a hospital trying to evacuate people as Rangers when they are morphed. So they're actually doing good out there. And by the end of the series, their powers weren't destroyed. They did give them back to Captain Mitchell, but they still went out and actually did stuff. They tried to save people without their morphers, but obviously they got their morphers back. He's like, hey, you just gave them to me, but here they are. You might want to use them. And I'm sure somewhere out there in Mariner Bay, they're still doing good. They're still morphing as Rangers and saving people. I mean, why would they even stop? I mean, just because the demons are gone doesn't mean there isn't going to be more threats out there to face. Again, a year later, you got Vipra that came back, so you had to go ahead and take care of her. And I'm sure it's a lot easier to save people from a burning building as the Red Ranger than opposed to your typical fireman garb, you know? So again, we already talked about Time Force, but also Time Force is rather unique in the instance that it is part of a government agency. Time Force is an agency that's meant to keep the peace. They're a police force. So in this case, you can give up being a ranger, but again, this is next man up because you're part of a force, and the ranger powers are given to people who are obviously qualified and they match. Now, the whole problem with getting Wes in there in the first place is because it's bonded to your DNA, and that that was necessary there to get Wes into the battle. But when Ransik is caught, everybody's still a ranger, and Wes and Eric are leading the Silver Guardians for free, I might add, and still doing good. Yes, they're writing up traffic tickets, but I'm imagining that was a slow day. So again, we have another case of Rangers who have their powers and still continue to do good with those powers afterwards. Wild Force, that was just Princess Shayla being a jerk about the powers, because just because the orgs are defeated doesn't mean there isn't still evil to fight. So Shayla, yeah, bad on you for doing that. Ninja Storm, they lost their powers at the end of that season, so they couldn't be Rangers, but they get their powers back in Dino Thunder in the crossover, and I imagine they're still using their Ranger powers for good. Primarily they are teaching, but I'd imagine the next time an alien invasion comes in, they're going to turn to the Ninja Rangers, the Wind Rangers, Thunder Rangers, whatever, and save the day. At least until Megaforce. Dino Thunder, they lost their powers, and there's no indication in Dino Thunder, SPD, or any following series, again, with the exception of Megaforce, that Connor, Ethan, Kara ever became Rangers again, or Trent became a Ranger. We know what Tommy's deal is about, but now they could not be Rangers because they don't have the powers anymore. And of course, those Rangers don't seem to me like they would be the ones to seek out powers to be a Ranger, but then again, that's probably just my bias against the Dino Thunder teens. But again, that's an example of them not being able to continue on as Rangers. SPD, similar situation. And in this case, Jack did retire. He gave up SPD, and of course, Sky became the Red Ranger. And I'm fine with him doing that in this instance because Jack quit for selfish reasons, yes, personal reasons, because he wanted to help out people, and he felt that now that Grum was contained, there was no more need for him as the Red Ranger, and he could do more good by doing this. And what's different there than in the instance of, say, Jason, is that they had somebody step up, but he knew that there was a backup plan. He's part of an organization that strong-armed him to get in the first place, who's had Red Rangers before. We know that there were at least 2 Red Rangers before Jack got there, and that there would be a Red Ranger after him, and another Red Ranger after that, because 2 of his teammates, they eventually both became Red Rangers. So it's something that, there's that next man up. What was it that Christopher Titus said? Step up or step aside. And he stepped aside to let somebody else come up, but he knew somebody was there. Jason doesn't have that luxury. How does he know that Zordon is going to have a replacement for him, that he could just quit like that? You can't just quit like that from being a Power Ranger, but you can as an SPD Ranger because, and again, the difference here is not only was there somebody to step up, but the threat was neutralized and things were back to the status quo before Grum got there. So I hope you guys understand the difference between Jack retiring from being a Ranger and Jason retiring from being a Ranger, because I do think there's a significant difference there. Mystic Force, the implication is they lost their powers at the end of that series, with the exception of Xander, who, of course, has his powers in Operation Overdrive, but that's only because of the Sentinel Knight. So again, these Rangers could not, become Rangers again because they lacked the power. They still had magic, so forth. But again, if they wanted to be Rangers, they wanted to do good, they have to do something other than being Rangers because they can't in that instance. Operation Overdrive, they still have their powers, but I still like Operation Overdrive. I'm not going to say it's the best series, but it is one of the better ones, I think, despite everybody else's protests. But I am realizing that those Rangers are kind of flaky, if you guys get what I mean, because remember when I talked earlier about no Ranger identifying themselves as the Ranger that they don't look as their self-identity? Well, the odd thing about the Operation Overdrive Rangers, and just to go on a tangent here, is that they didn't want to be Rangers. They became Rangers, became so dependent on it that they were completely and utterly lost when they lost their powers in the Once a Ranger crossover. Gained their powers back, of course, and then they kind of got over that and were willing to give up their powers at the end of the series to go do whatever at that point, because their particular mission was over. So yes, there's a story arc about self-identity as a Ranger, but I do believe that if Hartford calls them up and says, hey, there's a new threat, we need you to return as a Power Ranger, I guarantee every single one of them in a heartbeat would be out there to be Rangers again, because they did learn their lesson, I would say. But again, they gave it up because the threat was over, and of course they can come back at any time, but I do have to admit, Hartford could have easily set up a Ranger patrol squad much in the same way that Mr. Collins did with the Silver Guardian. So, but then again, Hartford is rich and likely Republican, and well, that just gets into a whole mess of things. Okay. I don't recall off the top of my head if Jungle Fury lost their powers or not. I'm going to say they didn't. Correct me on that if you like in the comments below. But again, that particular instance means Daishi was defeated, and to be honest, that was the entire purpose of the Order of the Claw, was to contain and protect the world should Daishi ever return. Now that Daishi's gone, what's the Pashui going to do now exactly? They can still go out and do good, but of course it depends on what their overall mission statement is. Let's see, Jungle Fury, Operation Over Jungle, RPM. Now, in that particular case, I don't blame the RPM Rangers for giving up their powers in this instance, simply because Venjix is gone. Who else is there exactly? I mean, you have the Dome Civ Cornith. To our knowledge, those are the only people who are left in the world. So why do you need your Ranger powers at this point? Honestly. Yeah, maybe there's something about an alien invasion, that Earth is ripe for the picking now, or something like that. But that's something where you can call the guys back and say, hey, you need to go ahead and do this. You don't have to have the Morpher with you 24/7. And of course, everybody else is busy with the reconstruction of the entire planet, as opposed to being a Ranger. So for them to actually give up their powers at the end of the series to retire, that makes a lot of sense, because there really isn't anything else to fight at that point, barring alien invasion. And again, who knows what the hell is going on in the RPM universe anyway, especially when we revisit it in Megaforce. Megaforce just throws a lot of stuff into this, and again, we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay, next is Samurai, and they have the same thing. That's a lineage thing where you can't quit, you can't retire. And I think Linkara makes a great point about child soldiers in this particular case, that they're not really allowed to not be Rangers. But if they don't want to be Rangers, then they have to really raise the next generation. Because here's the thing, if Kevin got back to his Olympic swimming career, of course, but that's only because they defeated the Nihilok. Should the Nihilok return, he has to come back. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about the way that his character is and the way that it's treated within the series. They have to return to being Rangers. The only way out of it is to procreate and raise the next warrior and just, hand it off. It's like, you know what? It's your time. You become the Ranger, I give up. You can't retire as a Samurai Ranger. It's your family's legacy. It's the honor code. It comes from generations of samurai upbringing that date back to Japan, and now we have this multinational Ranger team, which is something for another time, of course. But yeah, you can't really retire in that situation, and not because there's still enemies to fight, but because you're pretty much born into that. It's something you just can't get out of, unfortunately, and that's something that, well, seriously does need to be explored a little bit more, maybe in some other materials. Then we get to Megaforce, who at the end of the series has their powers. And here's the thing. Knowing what we know, now let's assume that Megaforce is completely straight and my fan theory or some other crazy stuff isn't taking place, whatever. They still have their powers, and I don't see them giving up their powers in this particular instance, because they've become so cocky and full of themselves that of course they want to continue to be Rangers, and who knows what they would do now that there's no mutants or armada or machines or anybody to go ahead and fight. But I totally expect the Megaforce Rangers to still be out there being Rangers and doing something in Harwood County or wherever the heck they are. And of course, it's a good example when you go ahead and take a look at the Legendary War, that we still don't know who half the people are in the Ranger identities, particularly because it changes so much. I mean, we can assume that, those are the Robot Rangers, and that's Jason as the Red Ranger, and Rocky's the Zeo Blue Ranger. But I think that there is an illustration that you don't walk away from being Power Ranger in that sense. You can't really retire because they're always going to be a threat. Because at this point, Jason had been the Red Ranger in, well, counting Forever Red, what was that, 15 years, something like that, give or take. Yeah, that's about the time he hadn't been the Red Ranger. Who knows what he had actually been doing in real life, but it's something he obviously had to come back to, because and let's use Jason again as an example. If there's a battle to be fought and he has his powers as the Red Ranger, he's going to come back as the Red Ranger and do something about it. Although I will say the character like Jason, like Tommy, and like many of the other Rangers, if there was a battle to be fought and they didn't have their powers, they would come back and fight. Now, some people would argue that Operation Overdrive Rangers wouldn't, but I would argue that they learned their lesson and, well, now they would. Excuse me. Um, so really, Ranger retirement isn't necessarily an option for a lot of these Rangers. And so when we go back to Nightwing's original comment here for the Power Rangers, well, I mean, again, this is relating to Sentai, and I'll talk briefly about that. But could you imagine any of the Rangers who have their powers, who have the ability to do good, would just give it to somebody temporarily, hope that they would bring it back? I mean, he's another Ranger, so I'm sure they would trust him, and not get involved in that particular battle. Again, powers or not, could you see Tommy doing that? Could you see Kimberly doing that? Could you see Sky doing that? Could you see Nick doing that? Could you see Kelsey doing that? Could you see any of these Rangers who still have their powers and they're told there's a battle to be fought out there, we just need your powers and not you? Do you see them just sitting on the sidelines and letting people go out there and fight on their behalf? Hell no. I don't see that happening with any of the Rangers. Not even the RPM Rangers. As much as I hate that series, I do believe that the RPM Rangers, that if, Dr. K, comes back and says, there's another, somebody else, there's a fight going on, we need you as a Ranger, every single one of them, including Dylan, would come back and become Rangers to fight off whatever this new threat is. That's just something that I know they would go ahead and do. And now let's go back to Sentai for a second. Again, I haven't seen the entire series. I've probably seen maybe a third of the entirety of the series. You know what? Maybe not even a third. Maybe a quarter of it. I've probably seen 10 full seasons, maybe 12. I don't see any of those Rangers doing that either. Now, again, I don't think there are any Rangers in Sentai that have their own self-identity tied into their Ranger powers, but I just don't see them saying idly by and getting on with their own lives that they have outside of it. Look at a good example here. Let's go back to Power Rangers. Look at the roundup scene for Time for Lightspeed. What was happening when Joel got the call to be a Power Ranger again? He was about to go on his honeymoon cruise with Dr. Fairweather. And he had to go. He looked at her, she looked at him, and she's like, I know you have to go, so go do it. And she recognizes, and he recognizes, that they have their lives, but being a Power Ranger is a higher calling, it's a higher purpose, it's a sense of duty. That no matter what your personal life is, you have to sacrifice for that. It goes back to like the whole Peter Parker Spider-Man paradox. And again, this is something I would have to agree with Linkara on, is that you have to look at, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize being Peter Parker, or do you prioritize being Spider-Man? Because you have to commit to one or the other in that particular role. Granted, many Power Rangers don't have the same issues as Spider-Man, as Peter Parker does, but there has to be that line where you have to give up what you're doing to go save the future of humanity, because that's what it ultimately boils down to. Because if Zed comes back, you can't be worried about, going to marriage counseling or something with your wife. You have to say, I can't do this, I got this. Or, if Mesogog returns and starts turning people into dinosaurs, you can't be worried about going to your 9-to-5 job. You have to pick up that morpher and go out there and take care of it. That's something you have to go ahead and do. And again, for the implication to be that Guy can go around in the Sentai universe, tell these guys, we just need your powers, and you need to, not worry about it, I think that's going against the spirit of what it means to be a Sentai Ranger, and is a disservice to those particular characters. That all you want is the powers, you don't care about us. I think that's ultimately what I'm looking at with these Gokai changes, is that you don't care about the person, you care about the powers. What's the point of having the original Aka Ranger character when you just have his suit and his weapon. That's all you need. Why do you need Geki to be Tyrell Ranger? We just need his gun and his sword. That's all we actually need from him. We don't need his years of experience, tactical combat, and leadership skills. Oh, we don't need that whatsoever. We don't need Soji's combat and sword skills with the feather's edge and everything else, and the experience that he's had. We just need his suit and his sword. We don't need any of that stuff. All we need are the powers. We don't need the person. And that's, I guess, what's really rubbing me the wrong way. Because, again, when there's a battle to be fought, those people have to step up and make the call. Now, I know that's easy for me to say, being somebody who's, never been a Power Ranger, never been Sentai, never had those same opportunities to fight like that and put personal life aside. But I have to admit, Power Rangers are, well, better than us in a lot of ways. That they can actually do that they can put aside their personal feelings and personal issues to go out and be Rangers. Now, again, as I said, a lot of them were selfish by giving up their powers in the first place, but given that opportunity to maybe do it all over again, would they change it? I think a lot of them would. And given their powers to come back and fight something new, they all do it because that's exactly what they did in the Legacy War. Some of them didn't have their powers, they were given it back. Some of them were out busy having their own lives, but like, we need you to fight off the Armada. And like, okay, I'm going to come and help you guys fight the Armada. That's what I'm going to go ahead and do. So, I know I'm all over the place on this, but this is just one of those really unique things that just comes out of somebody's comment. And again, I respect his opinion on that about lives outside of being Sentai and giving them a break to have their own lives and stuff, but I don't know, it's just kind of those things. Like, I just can imagine myself, being a Power Ranger for a year, fights over whatever, I still retain my powers, I go off and have my own life, but then somebody said, there's a great catastrophe going on, we just need your powers, give them to us. I'm not going to do that, particularly since I lost my powers and I regained it. Because here's something else, too, I'd like to go ahead and bring up. If you have lives, let's say we're in the Sentai universe, and let's just kind of stretch this a little bit further. You lose your powers in the Legendary War, but you get your powers back at the end of the Gokaiger in the form of the Ranger Key. Now, of course, you have an option. You spent, I believe the timeline between the Legendary War and Gokaiger is about 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. Again, please correct me if I'm wrong on that. So you've had 5 years or so to not have your powers to do whatever it is your normal life is. Earth hasn't been under attack, nothing's been going on, whatever. Everything is hunky-dory. Then the Gokaigers defeat the enemy, who you couldn't do anything about because you didn't have powers, and we saw that illustrated well in the Sentai 199 movie. Then you get your powers back, you have your key, you can go ahead and transform. Okay, so now you have the option. Do you continue your normal life, or do you go back to being a Power Ranger? Things are at peace, but as history has taught you, hey, crap's going to happen again. There's always going to be a new alien. There's going to be a new demon. There's going to be a new dark energy, whatever that arises from the earth, some hidden empire. Something is going to come back. There is no doubt of that. That's always going to happen. That's just kind of the way it is in the Sentai universe. So if you choose to go ahead and be a Ranger again, why would you give up your powers? And if you give up your powers for the Gokaiger to go use them for whatever petty little thing they're doing, why not just let them keep them? If you're so concerned with your personal life and you can just give up your powers that easily to a bunch of pirates going looking for treasure, then just give them your key. Don't bother them returning it. Because it's really hard for me to describe 200 superheroes in this regard, but if you're going to give them your key for a stupid reason like trying to find buried treasure, which again, nobody knows what it is exactly, just that it's buried treasure, something on Earth that was established at the beginning of the episode, if that's the only thing, then why not just keep the power? Are you saying you're done with it? And maybe you should be done if you're just going to let them use your powers like that. I know that sounds like it's being pretty harsh there, but come on, you don't just get your powers back after losing for 5 years. And, again, if they decide I won't be Rangers anymore and they put that key in a box and put away and whatever and stuff, again, if you're going to give the power away, just for that one instant, just give it away permanently. Because obviously you don't care about being a Ranger, and you realize, hey, they don't care either. They just want your powers. They don't want you. Again, um, Mido Ranger is pushing 60, 70 years old. Maybe he's no longer physically fit, despite the fact what he did in the 199 movie. But, you know, either you keep your powers or you retire and you give them to somebody else. I don't know. It's a really complicated issue, and it's going to vary from person to person, situation to situation. But again, it's like, that's why Batman never retires. That's why Superman never retires. That's why those heroes fight until they are dead. Which is why the end of Dark Knight Rises always kind of bugged me. I mean, I know the Kevin Conroy Batman would never do what the Christian Bale Batman did, but again, maybe that's the same thing as like you feel that it's over, next person is going to stand up. But again, like I said, it's so different from a police force and an army than it is being a Power Ranger, or in Batman's case, an individual superhero who really has no Bat family other than Alfred and Gordon in this particular in the Nolan verse. I think I've made my point clear. I think I've gone on long enough on this. So I really want to hear you guys kind of weigh in your thoughts on this situation about Rangers and retirement and coming back and just, you know, taking everything I've said for the last 45 minutes. What do you guys think? What are your summed up thoughts in it? And leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about this whole situation. I do want to thank Nightwing45304 for making the comment. Again, I don't agree with the comment, but I appreciate that you put it out there and that it led to this episode because heck, that was a great conversation start for something I never really thought about, and I thought about it, and now it's out there. So let's hear everyone's thoughts on Ranger retirement as they regard to what I've talked about. All right, so thank you guys for listening. Have a good evening, and the tavern is now closed.